Good evening, everyone. I'm Dylan Rajapaksha from White Lab Innovations Lab, and I'm also a member of the SLASCOM General Council. Welcome to day number 4 of Digital IT BPM Week 2020. This is organized by SLASCOM, EDB, ICTA, and FITES with the contribution of number of knowledge partners from the industry. As you know, this program is scheduled for 5 days, and today is the 4th day. Each day, we will be having 2 webinars, and the first webinar for today is Microservices and Containers 101 with Spring Boot and Docker. The knowledge partner for today is White Lab Innovations Lab. Previously known as B Sharp Lanka Private Limited, White Lab Innovations Lab creates blockchain, mobile, and web-based solutions and specialized in the healthcare domain. White Lab has over 200 customers in North America, Europe, Middle East, and Australia. So before I hand over you to our resource person, let me remind you that you can ask your questions using the chat box in Zoom, as well as you can use Slido. The event ID for Slido is ITBPM Week 7, which you can see on screen right now. And also let me remind you that at the end of this session, you will be having a challenge questions from us. And those who can give the correct answers will receive some gifts from White Lab Innovations Lab. The resource person for today is Callum Thenura. He has over 14 years of experience in the IT industry, and currently Callum works as the software development manager at White Lab Innovations Lab. So Callum, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Dylan. Dylan, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Callum Thenura, and I am from White Lab Innovations Lab. I am excited to be here at ITBPM Week 2020 digital version and share my thoughts with you guys. Okay, the topic for today is about microservices. So, what is microservice? Nowadays, microservice is a buzzword, and everyone wants to create an application with microservices architecture, right? So in this presentation, let's look at what microservices are really all about, right? So rather than going through the theories, let's start with a simple story. Okay. This is the first generation of the computers, which is called mainframe, and it was big enough to fill a room, right? So at that time, developers would need to go to that computer, provide the instructions, and mainframe will execute the instructions and provide the results. So it could take days, it could take weeks, or it could take hours, right? So then let's fast forward to the desktop computers. So you know that this desktop computer, and it contains the instructions that are need to execute. So the developers wrote the programs, compile, and install into the computer. It's like a Microsoft Word or text editor you installed on your machine, right? So let's move to the next one. So with the time, it has started evolving how we write the code. For an example, developer would start a code project, start writing code for the functionality, right? Then install it to the user computer, as you can see, right? When we need more functionality, we introduce more and more code into the application like this, right? So the size of the code project keep increasing over time. So the project started with a very small code base, might end up with a very large code base over time, right? So let's move to the next slide. So later, some best practices were introduced to handle such larger projects. So developers can reduce the code complexity that you saw in earlier slide. Developers were recommended to break the code into a smaller related code modules like this, right? Smaller related code modules like this, and each module contains the related functionality, and it should be reusable, right? So now the application is organized with smaller, more meaningful functional units, and it's somehow easy to manage the code base now, right? However, when it comes to the deployment, it's still this larger, big final executable. No matter how developers were modularized and organized the source code, the final distribution is one executable, right? So we have been working like this for so long, and then the era of the web applications came into the industry, right? So with the introduction of these web applications, people started moving away from the applications which need to be installed in the local machines toward the web applications where the applications is installed into a remote web server. So it's like this. So here you can see the application, the organized code modules, and then the web server. And at the last, what we do is we build this application and install in the server, and multiple users using the browsers, they can connect to the same server. So then we no longer need that. We no longer need to install the software in the user machine, right? So this is the traditional architecture for the web application, right? So let's take an example of a web application and how we can design and architect the application. Here's the proposed design for an online store, right? So as you previously mentioned, so here you can see different modules. A module for the storefront UI, and module for the catalog, order, and payment, right? So as you can see, it is modularized into functional units, right? So, and each module is layered into separate layer, the UI, business logic, and the presentation layer. And each layer has a different responsibility, so it's highly cohesive and low coupling system. Now the browsers and mobile applications can communicate via the UI layer, and then the UI layer will pass the control to the business logic layer, and so on. Right? We call this as the monolithic architecture. Right? Monolithic means, actually mono means single, lithic means stone. Actually it's a single stone. That means one final artifact, right? So this is our traditional way of doing web applications, and we have been doing this for last couple of years with very successful results, right? So let's see how we are going to deploy these traditional monolith applications, right? When we take monolith architectural approach, we package everything up as an application. In the Java world, it could be a EAR, WO file, or jar file. In fact, most of the applications I have worked past couple of years had this architecture, and it has a good reason for that. In the beginning, the application with this architecture is simple to develop, simple to test, simple to deploy, and simple to scale. All the tools and processors around to test and scale these monolith applications were there, right? So, but over time, the successful applications have a habit of growing. We normally don't just develop an application and stop. We continue to add new features to the application. So the team of the application developers make this application little bigger every day by committing the code. Over time, the development, testing, deployment, and scaling becomes much more difficult. Let's look at why. Right? So these are the drawbacks and issues of the monolithic architecture. The first thing is it's difficult to understand. Every app's update makes it code bigger, or sometimes it's become too complex to understand and manage. And it's difficult. And when it comes to the scalability, if an app is big, it can slow down the startup time because you can add new components. You can't add new components independently. And the other thing is any code change affects the whole system, so it makes the overall development process long, right? The fourth one is complexity, right? When it gets too big, it becomes too hard to maintain. The other one is innovation. applying a new technology in a monolithic app is extremely problematic because it has to be rewritten. For an example, suppose we have a Java application written in JDK 5, Java 5, and we want to improve the application performance by introducing the streams architecture introduced by Java 8. So in that case, there is no other option than upgrading the whole monolith application into Java 8 and test and certify it for Java 8, right? The other thing is coupling. So monolith classes are tightly coupled. So if one fails, it will compromise the other service in the app. For an example, in our online store, let's say our payment system got down or it becomes slow. So the whole system got paralyzes the workflow of the whole online system, right? So let's see what are the solutions available for these monolithic, the issues introduced by these monolithic applications, right? Obviously, the solution, of course, is to use Microsoft architecture, but let's look at the concept more closer. There is a book called The Art of Scalability, written by some architects work at eBay. In that book, they have this three-dimensional model of scalability. There is a three-dimensional axis along which you can scale your application, where the x-axis is running multiple copies of your application behind the load balancer, right? What here really interesting is that y-axis scaling. In other words, functional decomposition, right? So functional decomposition. So that is where you break your monolith application into much smaller services or applications, right? So that is the basic definition for microservices. So that is functional decomposition. Okay. Okay, let's apply this microservices architecture into the online store application that we previously discussed. So it ends up with the architecture like this. What were previously defined as code modules within our application now become standalone, independently deployable, and scalable services. Each one of these has its own databases. You can remember that earlier the catalog, order, and payment were modules inside the one application. Now it becomes more independent services which has their own database. So we have a catalog service, order service, and payment service, right? So these are the main features of microservices architecture, and it has a lot of advantages, but introduce lots of issues, which I'm going to talk in a little while, right? So this is basically the microservices architecture in a nutshell. So let's move to the next slide, right? And the nice about this architecture is it enables agile development and continuous deployment. Let's see how we can do that. For example, we can have small teams, and each team can own one or more services. They are able to develop it independently, deploy it independently, and scale it independently. So it sort of fits with the modern organizational thinking and also modern thinking around processors, right? So let's see the drawbacks of this microservices architecture, right? The first and biggest drawback is complexity of developing a distributed system, right? So by far the biggest drawback of microservices is the complexity. Earlier we developed one single application where all modules can communicate via the language level method calls or function level method calls. But now we have to deal with inter-process communication, right? Inter-process communication, there are some tools for messaging and remote procedure calls, but it adds this extra complexity on top of the system. The other thing is handling partial failures. For example, you can think about, like, you can take this example. For example, say that user wants to complete an order. So in that case, what happens if the payment service goes down or if it becomes slow? So the order system might not get a response from the payment service. Therefore, as a programmer, we should be mindful about these scenarios and program the situation accordingly, right? So the next drawback is the business transactions spawns across multiple databases. For example, in order to successfully complete an order, user should be able to update the order service, update the catalog service, update the order service, and finally update the payment service. So what happens if any of these services fails, right? So we can't complete the transactions. So in that case, we can't use our traditional way of doing transactions like ACID transactions or two-phase commit transactions, right? The other complexity, the other drawback is the testing. In here, if you want to test the order completion workflow, it involves all these dependent services, right? The next one is complexity of deploying and operating the distributed system. Now it's about different services with different databases and frameworks. Requirement needs to be deployed and managed and monitored, right? So, but the nice thing is, fortunately, we have solutions for these most of these drawbacks, right? So let's see what are those solutions, right? First, the benefits typically, in general, for large complex applications, the benefits of microservices tend to outweigh the drawbacks, right? So that's why most of the big players now trying to move into microservices, right? So let's see what are the success stories of microservices, adopting microservices. So Netflix is one of the early adopters of microservices, and it contributed a lot to open source community with microservices libraries. Those companies initially started with a huge monolith and was able to benefit a lot by moving into the microservices, right? So here's a case study. Let's see, actually this diagram depicts the initial design of the Uber's monolithic architecture, right? As you can see that Uber has started the application in one big application. Here you can see the passenger module. Here you can see the rider module, the location module, notification module, and the payment module were packaged into one big application. And the REST APIs were exposed, and there are some other third-party integrations included via these adapters, right? So Uber was started like this, but later they moved into an architecture like this, where they decompose the application into more meaningful independent services. Here you can see the passenger management service, and driver management service, and the trip management service, payment service. So now everything is decomposed and they can evolve independently, right? So let's see what are the frameworks which we can use to develop microservices. The first and obvious choice for me is Spring Boot. I have been working with Spring Boot for the last couple of years, and it has rich support for microservices and their patterns, right? And the other framework I want to mention is Quarks. It's a picking up, and I want to highlight this last one, the Ballerina microservices language, as it was developed and maintained by our friends at WSO2. So we can be proud of that as a Sri Lankan company. So now they are in the market, the Ballerina, right? Here I am going to give a gentle introduction about Spring Cloud components of Spring Boot framework and how they can be used in microservices architecture, right? So Spring Cloud provides a tools for developers to quickly build some of the common patterns in distributed systems using microservices, right? Actually, Spring Boot provides components to address the previously mentioned drawbacks of the microservices. Using these components, we can avoid most of the drawbacks we mentioned earlier, right? So the features could be of this Spring Cloud, it provides features and components to service registration and discovery, service-to-service calls, load balancing, routing, circuit breakers, distributed messaging, and distributed version and configuration. Right? Let's see how the basic Spring Cloud component works here. Right? Assume, say, this is a very simple microservices architecture. Here you have the IoT devices, and you can see the mobile devices, and you can see the browser. All these things can communicate with internal services via the API gateway. So API gateway is kind of a facade. It provides the unified way of accessing these services, right? And there's another component called service registry. So where all the services can register, right? So the API gateways and the other services can locate where the other services are. For example, if this microservices want to call this microservices, they can locate the microservices, this microservice by looking at the service registry, right? And if you want to keep the configuration in one centralized place, you can use the config server. Right? Likewise, Spring provides very rich set of components to manage the microservice patterns. So far we have discussed about the basic architecture and how to develop the microservices. So let's see how we can deploy the microservices. Right? Suppose we have decided to develop our application using a microservices architecture. Right? And now we have a number of different services to deploy instead of one application. So it could be 10 services, or it could be 100 services. Right? We need to find a way to effectively deploy, manage, and monitor these services. Right? So these services can be written using a variety of languages, frameworks, and framework versions. For example, the one service could be in Java, the other service could be Node.js, the other service could be Ruby, right? Likewise. So, and each service consists of multiple service instances for scalability and availability. For an example, if we take our online order application, say for example, if the user during a weekend there's a heavy usage on the orders, the product search page, right? So in that case, we might need to make the scale the order module, the order service, into more than one service. So there could be more than one instance of that service running behind the load balancer, right? So the other thing is that building and deploying should be fast, right? And services must be deployed and scaled independently, and service instances need to be isolated, and deployment must be reliable and cost effective, right? So let's see what are the options we have there to achieve these features that we discussed earlier. So our traditional way of deploy deploy the multiple services per host could be the multiple services per host. So which is not the recommended way because it's really difficult to scale, right? So then we can think of having single service per host, so which can be a service per VM or service per container, right? There are trade-offs with each of these approach. However, over time, this container-based approach started proving that it is incredibly effective way for deploying microservices-based applications, right? So let's see how we can deploy it using a container. So the idea is to take the service, package it as a container image, and deploy it in a VM or a server, right? So As you can see, these containers provide great isolation, great manageability, and these containers encapsulate the implementation technology. Remember that earlier I was telling about the service could be built using different technology stacks like Java or Node, so as you can see, this container encapsulate the implementation technology, right? And we can achieve the efficient resource utilization, which I'm going to talk next. And this will be really fast to deployment, right? So let's see what is containers, right? Containers are super lightweight OS level virtualization techniques, right? So you can get very efficient resource utilization unlike traditional virtual machines. Here, actually, when you look at the traditional virtual machines, you have the machine infrastructure, and on top of that, you can have the hypervisor, and top of that hypervisor, you have the guest OSs, right? On that top of that guest OSs, you can have the required libraries and then the applications, right? This is not the efficient way of handling the resources. But when it comes to the containers, on top of the container infrastructure, it has the operating system. On top of that operating system, there's a container engine, right? So the applications can directly work on container engines, and container engine is directly working with operating systems, right? So let's talk about Docker, right? Docker is a container framework designed to make it easier to create, deploy, and run application using containers, right? So Docker is when it comes to the industry, Docker is actually the leading container platform now, right? So finally, microservices is not a silver bullet, right? Almost all the successful microservice stories has started with a monolith, right? And then when it becomes too big, and it was broken down. Actually, I copied this from one of the authors. Actually, you know who this is? This is called Martin Fowler. He's the well-known author in this software industry, right? According to him, almost all the cases where he heard of a system that was built as a microservice from scratch, it has ended up in a serious trouble, right? So we need to be careful with our choice, right? We can't just apply the microservices. We need to look at our application nature, and what is the actual requirement. So if we have a monolith and it used to work perfectly for our users, there is no need to go for a microservices, right? So we need to be very careful when we decide the design architectural choice, right? So that's it for my presentation. So this is actually we want to give you a question, right? So if you can email the answers for these questions, right? We can look at those questions, and the gifts will be given for selected answers, right? The question would be, provide the names for the Spring Cloud components which supports below microservices patterns, right? So in here, you can read about Spring Boot and Spring Cloud, and you need to find the components introduced by Spring Boot to handle each of these microservice patterns, right? So questions. That concludes my presentation, right? You can ask, if you have any questions, you can ask using the Slido, using the event IT BPM Week 7. Do you have any questions? You can ask now.
Callum, there's a question in Slido.
Is the Spring frame? The question is the Spring framework worth learning in 2020? Yes, I guess so. Because it provide actually Spring actually backed by a company called Pivotal. So they have started adding more and more features for the microservices and all other areas. Actually, Spring is a framework where they encapsulate. Actually, for example, the Spring provides frameworks like Spring JDBC and for the caching mechanism and the dependency injections, and they provide all lot of utility functions and wrappers around those functionalities. So I would say it's a, and when it comes to the Spring Boot, it's really picking up last couple of years. So I would say it's a good idea to learn Spring Boot in 2020. And there's one other question in Zoom. What type of projects are suitable to implement microservices? So actually, I have explained as I explained in my presentation. Say for example, let's take that online store. In that online store, for a given day, there could be a heavy load for the product search, right? For example, let's say eBay, in USA, they have a Black Friday, right? So during the Black Friday, there's a huge traffic on the eBay, right? So initially they had the monolith and they couldn't cope with that load. So that's why they wanted to move their monolithic architecture into more meaningful functional units, so they can independently scale those areas. For example, in the eBay, there are millions of users go to the product page and search, and there's a heavy load on the search page. And if the monolith can't cope with that, what we can do is we can take out that product functionality and evolve as an independent service. So it can evolve independently and scale independently without affecting to the other modules. So I would say, as my understanding, if the application wants to scale independently and want to provide more throughput and want to become more responsive, so it's a good idea to move those particular services as the microservices. So Dinesh De Silva. So basically, if we are to create a product, the monolith approach should be the first approach in a theoretical way. Honestly, I don't have experience with starting with microservices. I have experience with breaking the existing huge monolith into microservices because of a reason. So I can't exactly say that's the best approach, but as Martin Fowler said, most of the early adopters of microservices and success stories in the industry were initially started as a big monolith, right? When you started with a big monolith, only you can identify the functional boundaries, the limitations, and all those stuff. So in here, I can't give an exact answer for this, but starting a monolith is a big thing. Starting a monolith is a good thing, but there are companies I know which they have started the microservices as a first thing, but I don't have much experience on that. But if you know the theories and if you know the functional boundaries and if you know the non-functional requirements like performance and the demand and throughput, you can go for a microservices at first. So Kasun Udayanga, why each microservices have a separate database? Is it possible to use single databases? Yes. Is it very possible to use single database? But in here, think about, like, as we discussed earlier, microservices should be able to evolve independently. And microservices should be used what is best for it. For example, we are more using a traditional RDBMS databases, right? So in that case, for example, we got a requirement that we need a very fast database where we need to store big documents and we need to retrieve that documents really fast, right? So in that case, I would recommend to go for a NoSQL database like MongoDB, right? So in that case, if you can align that module with the MongoDB database, it can evolve independently, and our required performance can be achieved, right? But I know there are trade-offs, right? So in one module, in one service, we are using RDBMS. In one module, we are using a MongoDB. So there should be a way of synchronizing the talking applications to each other and synchronization the applications. But there are design patterns and there are ways we can do like event sourcing and all those stuff. So is it possible? It is possible to use a single database, but by looking at the real requirement, we can look for a different database or different data structure or even a file structure or even a hard drive, right? It's not, it doesn't matter. It depends on the service. R. Dilshan, how do we distribute the authentication, JWT, when we are dealing with multiple services? Any mechanism? Yes, actually, when you have multiple services, we can go for a authentication server like WSO2. WSO2, they have a authentication platform, right? Where it's an authentication server where all the microservices can talk to that authentication server and validate their authentication, authorize and authenticate their services. Yes, there are mechanisms and authentication servers. Is this suit for mobile app development? Yes, I think that it's very, actually it's Charindu, mobile app development. Actually, when it comes to mobile app, I believe the mobile app is just the front end with the native or JavaScript front end. I believe that all the backend and business logic resides on the server side and exposed via a REST API or the graph query language or via gRPC. So I think that one of the best approach for mobile application is having these microservices. So it's easily call the REST APIs on the backend. So what is the difference between API and microservice? It's Thiman Samarasinghe. So actually, microservice is a one functional unit. Basically, microservice is a one functional unit. That functional unit can have many APIs exposed to consume that functional unit, right? So, for example, let's take our online order module, online order application. So it's a microservices could be the order service. So in the order service, you can have the order search API and order rating API and the inventory API. Likewise, you can have different APIs. Right? So Lasita MD. So in microservices, is there any trade-offs in choosing one language over the other? What could be probably good way to choose a language for a service? Okay, actually, I have the experience of developing microservices using only Java, right? But I know places like Uber and other big companies, they moved some of the critical microservices into Go language because they think the Go language is much faster when it comes to the search and when it comes to serving the client. So, and probably maybe, for example, Node.js. So it has this the background loop. So it's very good for the reactive programming, right? So likewise, it's depend on your service. Right? So I'm taking questions from this Slido. So is it worth learning Ballerina? Actually, I can't comment on that much now, but I visited WSO2 the page couple of times, and I saw that there are very good tutorials out there, and there are lots of blog posts, and it's picking up, so it's worth to give a try. I am taking this one. Can we build monolith application in a way that it's easy to break down as microservices later? Yes, that's a good question. Actually, if you can identify the functional boundaries earlier and modularize those functional boundaries, for example, as I mentioned in my online store application, there were three modules, right? Order module, actually, when it was a monolith, there were three modules: order module, payment module, what is that other code? Order module, payment module, and the product module, right? So in that case, when you do the monolith, if you can identify the functional boundaries, and if we can if we can combine those things into one service, one set of module, in later time, you can easily break those modules into the services, right? So that's what I normally do. When I do my development, I try to identify the functional boundaries and the dependence between each and every module. I try to define own modules and own services. So later I can easily move those as the microservices. So the other question, what are the best sources to learn microservices framework? Actually, what I do is I follow a website called Microservices IO. There's a guy called Chris Richardson who writes this blog. Actually, it has almost all the information, right? But that is good for learning the theories. But what I recommend is start with a small framework like Spring Boot and go through the tutorials and try to identify the patterns and best practices, and then you can move into the bigger development. Okay, so we have a couple of Q&As. You have opportunities for Spring Boot developers? Yes, we have opportunities, but for the moment we have all the recruitments until this COVID-19 things goes. The AR. What is the difference between microservices and RESTful applications? So actually, that's the same question that the earlier I was explained, the microservices and APIs. So RESTful is an architectural way where you can provide the response to the user. So definitely you can use RESTful applications to provide microservices. Okay, it's look like, do you have any other questions? Okay, Dinesh Silva. Is containerization can be used to deploy this? Yes, that's obvious. So if you take a Docker and say, for example, you need to deploy those different microservices into different Docker instances. So definitely we can use Kubernetes as the orchestration engine. So actually, I have experience using Kubernetes and Elastic. In AWS, there's a service called Elastic Container Service. So you can use either Kubernetes or Elastic Container Services to containerize and deploy the microservices. Okay, how do we test microservices? So what my recommendation is, actually what we do is when we do the microservices testing, we do a lot of mocking to we do a lot of mockings to actually simulate the dependent services. So for the moment, I don't have much experience on do the real testing on the microservices, but we started doing the testing on microservices by mocking the dependent services. Do you have any other questions? Okay, guys, looks like that's it. So I will back again, and here's the question. You can send this answers to this info@vitalhub.lk. So we'll go through these answers, and gifts should be given for the selected correct answers.
If you can read the question again, Callum, so those who have missed it.
Yeah. So the question is, provide the names for the Spring Cloud components which supports below microservices patterns: service discovery, API gateway, external configuration, circuit breaker, and distributed tracing.
All right, Callum, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation and taking your time and sharing your knowledge with everyone. I'm sure it was very useful to everyone who joined today. As Callum said, you can write to this email address with the answers, and Vital Hub will pick a winner, and you have opportunity to get a gift back from Vital Hub. So that's come to the end of session 1 of the day 4. And we have another session coming up at 7 o'clock to manage your personal finance. So looking forward to see you all back at 7 o'clock. So thank you so much for joining in.
Thanks, guys.